There's never a dull moment when it comes to Minnesota sports. Whether it's positive or negative.
The Yankees have swept the Twins.
Minnesota Sports Chat has you covered. Talking nothing but Minnesota sports all year long. It's time now for the soon-to-be award-winning, if only in his own mind, Minnesota Sports Chat with your host, Ross Brendel.
Well, the Minnesota Independent Podcaster Awards nominations are in, and I do not believe I've been nominated again. So we'll wait on that award. Welcome inside edition number 245 of the soon-to-be award-winning Minnesota Sports Chat, presented by my friends at Beans Coffee Company. Use the promo code SPORTSCHAT at coffeebybeans.com. That is coffeebybeans.com. Promo code SPORTSCHAT. You'll save some cash on, quite honestly, the most delicious coffee you will ever put into your mouth. I love the Perfectus blend. I think I've got Judd hooked on the Mikado, but they're all pretty darn good. And speaking of darn good, Mr. Judd Zulgad, SKOR North, his Substack page. What else are you doing? Hockey Magazine, 1,000 different
Minnesota
things.
Hockey Magazine, yeah. Some freelance for them. JuddZulgad.substack.com. Just wrote about Chris Finch for that. Published something just now on his week in which he finally decided that his patience was done. Loving it.
It's been kind of a revelation. Maybe we'll start there. I think best part about having you, Judd, we can talk about anything. I think we'll talk about a few teams here, potpourri style, shish kebab style, and then we'll move on and get on with our days. Maybe we'll start with our resurgent, for maybe the second time this year, Minnesota Timberwolves. They're now at their new, high water mark over 500. We're up to 5 games over 500 as we record this edition of Minnesota Sports Chat. Chris Finch has shown his disgust with the team in post-game pressers, even in victories, and tossed from a game on Wednesday night, even though some people are not really sure how he got tossed from a game. But we think we figured that out, right? Bozos, is that what it was?
He muttered bozos, which is just outstanding.
Is that one of the best clean insults you can give somebody, bozo?
Well, he did it on purpose. I'm telling you, he got a tech and he was in a bad mood, and his team was down by 2. He did it on purpose. He was trying to get tossed, and it worked.
There's nothing better in all of sports than the planned ejection, right? Because you're trying to fire your team up. Baseball managers do it all the time, or sometimes they do it because they know they have to protect guys. It's kind of a fun subplot of both of those sports. Okay, Minnesota Timberwolves trade deadline coming up in about a week right now, depending on who you talk to. Some people feel fairly split. Some people believe they'll make a move. Other people aren't so convinced. I don't know, Judd. I think Tim Connolly kind of operates in the shadows. You never really know who he's talking to and what's going to happen, and things tend to just come out of nowhere, and you go, whoa. I don't know if we'll go, whoa, a week from now, but I find it really hard to believe. I'm not saying that they won't. I just find it really hard to believe that they're going to hold on to Julius Randle, and then they allow him to basically use his opt-in for next year. It just feels like they're going, in my opinion, to find a way to try and move him. But also, is it possible with this nice resurgence, they want to see how it plays out the rest of the year?
Well, I think your bigger problem is actually trading him when you're in the second apron, which is a huge, there's so many things that we don't know. The new
I'll
CBA,
never figure that out, by the way, Judd. I'll never figure it out.
And it's all new. So the new CBA has made things so convoluted and confusing. I think they're going to trade him. Now, what they can get back, how they can work the trade, all of those things, I think that they would like to trade him. I'm with you. I don't think they have any interest in him opting in. I also think he's been playing better of late because of the deadline. And I don't think it's to showcase himself. I think it's one of these, I'm going to show you how well I can play. Now, as soon as the deadline goes by, it's blah. So, and he's not a bad player. I don't think he's a great fit here. But I think if Tim Connolly has his way, I think he will trade him. But I just like the fact the team's showing a pulse now. It was a perfect timing because Finch lit them up in the locker room and then in the press conference after the Hawks game because of the fact that they won the game, but they got outscored by like 9 points in the second half, and the Hawks were beyond depleted because of injuries. So it provided a great platform. And then it sounds like in the Wednesday film session, the morning of the Phoenix game, he lit into them again. So if they thought that he was not going to be pissed off still, he was. And then he got tossed, and I think he got tossed on purpose, down by 2, and they won by a bunch. So now you got to be a little careful because you can't go to this well all the time. But this has been such a lackadaisical team. And, the second half of the Hawks game, starting with Anthony Edwards, was just, I mean, he's right. It was disgusting. Like, that's a game that you can't beat the Nuggets by 29 points on Saturday. And that's a full strength team. And then come back on Monday and barely get by a Hawks team that's starting a guy who the night before started in the G League. So I'm glad that Chris Finch had finally had enough. And my only question was, what took so long? Because this group needed that, and they need kicks in the behinds.
How much, in your opinion, Judd, I won't pull punches here. I think a large part of the Wolves' struggles now here through the first 47, 48 games of the year, I put a lot of it on Ant. At some point, you need to step up and show that you're the alpha male, you're the leader of the team, and you're going to beat a team like the Hawks all by yourself. Mm-hmm. So I think some of this falls on Ant, perhaps maybe not being ready to, quote unquote, take the baton from Karl Anthony Towns and try and do it all by himself as the leader of the team, even though I think we all thought perhaps maybe he had grown into that. I think maybe we're seeing there's still maturity and progression to go from there. Again, I'm just one guy sitting behind a microphone. Could be wrong there. But I would also kind of spin this back and ask you this. Is there more? What is the ultimate wingman for Anthony Edwards? Every great that eventually wins a championship tends to have somebody next to them who helps push them over, helps them climb and scale that mountain. If it wasn't Karl Anthony Towns, and maybe it could have been Karl Anthony Towns if he wasn't making the money that he was making, because I think that divorce, if you want to call it that, was inevitable at some point. What does Karl Anthony Towns need on this team with him to help the Minnesota Timberwolves perhaps maybe be the team that ends the streak or the curse, whatever you want to call it, and bring a championship back to Minnesota? Who needs to ride along with him? And maybe not who, but what type of player?
Well, I think first of all, Ant needs to sort out his own thing. He's now worse than Cat complaining to officials every time.
Well, where do you think he learned it from?
Well, but the problem is he's the one that chastised Cat for it. And
you're right. You're right.
I really thought the Olympics would help him a ton. And if anything, I think he's regressed. So, and he's still a great player, but the fact is, you cannot complain every single trip down the floor or you're not going to get calls. You cannot check out in the second half against the Hawks. And Ant does set the lackadaisical tone, like he does. If he decides to play hard, everyone else pretty much comes along. If he does not, a lot of guys then take a pout of themselves. So I'm more worried right now about Ant taking care of Ant. And we could talk about, well, he's still 23 years old. He's not, but he's played a lot of games in this league, and he's been to a Western Conference Finals now. So, he needs, the fact that Finch has to lay into him to the point where he was, I don't think he was shaken, but he was clearly impacted by it, isn't a very good sign. Like, if you're going to be one of the best players, if you're going to be the face of the league, if you're going to get compared to Jordan, you can't just arbitrarily take halves and nights off on a consistent basis. So, and look, Cat got traded right before camp. I understand that. We all agreed it would probably take about 20 games, but these guys have used that as seemingly an excuse for way too long. So before we get concerned about, what Ant is going to have for his Robin to win a championship, he needs to decide if he wants to be Batman, because far too often he just decides, well, it's the Hawks. We're going to beat them. Like, in some ways, last night is disturbing because it's Durant. He's going to play hard against Durant. That's how he plays. And Finch literally had to get himself kicked out for his team to completely heed his pleas and advice. So, again, you can only go to that card X amount of times, but I'm glad that Finch did. I think the whole thing of being patient with this group is gone. You should not be patient. You should kick some butt. And quite frankly, if you make a trade by the deadline next week, I got no problem with that. These players have done very little to gain the loyalty of the Wolves brass.
Would you feel the same way if that trade or that move was actually kind of viewed as a sell-off? We're selling for this year for the future. I know that's not technically probably how it would work because money needs to match up.
Yeah.
But are you okay if it was more of this move probably isn't really going to help us this year, but it might help us next year?
No, because they'll still be talented. Like, this is a good team.
Yeah.
That's
There's good players
this.
here.
This is not the old Wolves who just, had a few good players, but for the most part had some awful talent. No. So I don't think there's any way, if they wanted to sell, they really can't because they've got a bunch of players. Like, if they trade Julius, it's not like they're a bad team. They are an underachieving team. They're a lackadaisical team. They're a team that's maddening, but they are a good team. And if they want to play like a good team, which they did, and I actually think Finch's anger was born from the Denver game. National TV, Saturday afternoon, Denver's at full strength. Denver's not as good as they were previously, but they still have the Joker. They're still a very good team. And the Wolves walloped them. And then to come back against Atlanta and play a half and then decide to take a half off. I think Finch looked at that Nuggets game and said, okay, this is what we're capable of, and this is what you're going to elect to do. The Wolves there is no team that is as big of obstacle to the Wolves as the Wolves themselves.
I want to take you back. I'm going to switch sports here, and I want to take you back to Championship Sunday, which was, handful of days ago now. We're recording on Thursday, 4 or 5 days ago. And I know the result for the Washington Commies was not what they would want it to be, but viewing the game in the prism of a Vikings fan, I would still classify myself as a fan. I watched that game, and all I could think about was, how are the Vikings in this situation next year? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, and you can interject. J.J. McCarthy is going to have to be pretty good. But when I think about this, I don't think the Vikings are that far off from being next year's Washington Commanders. It's entirely possible with a pretty similar roster, a quarterback that I think we all hope is pretty good. Maybe he won't be Jaden Daniels, but hopefully he's pretty good. I don't think it's that out of the realm of possibility that, I think the Vikings, they're probably not going to win 14 games next year. Maybe they're more of a 10 or 11 win regular season team. But I also don't buy, can they win the Super Bowl next year? I don't know. But I don't buy that they can't compete to be in the NFC title game next year. I think that's entirely possible. I don't know if that's the expectation, but I guess sell to me, Judd, that there's no chance the Vikings are in the NFC title game next year, because even with this same roster, if it was just this last season and J.J. McCarthy started from day one, you can convince me he would have taken them farther than Sam Darnold did.
I think what you've seen, though, is, and I agree. I mean, Philadelphia's a really nice team, and they're really well constructed, but I don't look at them and say, oh boy, the Vikings can't get there. And I think this is why O'Connell's comments after the Rams loss were very pointed, especially about the interior line. If you go back to training camp, Kevin O'Connell wanted this team to be tougher, and they came out tougher. The San Francisco win was impressive. The Houston win, impressive. But then as the season dragged on, they actually became, if this is the correct term, less tough. And by the playoffs, they were basically, or by the Detroit game, they were pushed around. And the reality is, and it's why O'Connell, I think, if he didn't go after, he certainly said we need to improve the interior of our line offensively. Saquon Barkley is a marvelous player, but the reality is, if you plop him back with the Giants, he's not this good. The offensive line, the toughness of the lines that Philadelphia has offensively and defensively, that's where the Vikings have to bolster themselves. And if they don't, they're going to continue to get pushed around when it matters most. And that's the thing about the run game. I do think their running back needs an upgrade, but I think if we think a running back's magically going to fix that, we're wrong. I think you need at least one big-time guard, and you need to have a mentality Like, it's fine to come out of training camp and say, okay, we're a tough team to play against, and then be a tough team to play against in weeks 1 through 6. It's another to take that into the winter and this time of year. And I would say that is where the Vikings are lacking the most. They still were too much of a pushover when it mattered most.
So I pushed buttons for you and Chip Scoggins today on Purple Access, a part of Purple Daily, which is available on YouTube or wherever you get your pods. And, it's going to, until he's not here or until he resigns, Sam Darnold's going to be talked about pretty much every day amongst Vikings fans. And we talked earlier, you and Chip talked earlier on Purple Access that right now there's a decent consensus out there that Sam Darnold might be back with the Minnesota Vikings. I'm not buying that possibility. I really am not, because I just don't see how that sets them up in any other position that was different from where they were with Kirk Cousins, cap issues. How far can he realistically take you? Maybe if it's a 1-year deal, I can buy that. Or as I think I mentioned with you guys, I could buy a 2-year deal where it's front loaded into 1 year. But I would still say that still hurts you in the long run because it stops you from signing players this year who could help you 2-3 years from now. So right. I'm not really buying it, Judd. I don't view that that's going to happen. That you go back to about this time last year, there were still some people saying, oh, there's a chance Kirk Cousins comes back to Minnesota. I didn't buy that, and I don't buy this. But should I be buying it? Is there a percentage? Because I don't see it, but is it higher than I think it is?
There's a percentage, but I don't see it. I just don't see, if J.J. McCarthy, unless they are privately very concerned about McCarthy's health, he's going to be the starter. Like, you don't back off. You don't say Darnold played really well for he played really well for, let's say, 12 games. You don't say, well, he played really well for 12 games. And by the way, in the last 2, completely folded like a cheap suit. And now we're going to consider bringing him back. I just don't see it. Now, do I think the Vikings are trying to, and quite frankly, it behooves the Darnold camp too, to jack up his potential price tag to
absolutely
to franchise him? Like, I think the Vikings and the people that represent Darnold are probably on the same page. Let's get that price tag, because if he is franchised by the Vikings and traded, the starting point for negotiations at that point is $40 million a year. It's my opinion, if the Vikings allow him to walk out the door, he's going to get somewhere in the 30s per year. So it helps everybody to try to create this, hey, we really want him back. We think he was great. It makes no sense. And I would argue against it if he had played pretty well against, let's say, Detroit or Los Angeles. But that complete collapse, I told Chip this. There's no way that you can watch that collapse in the last 2 games, but then like harken back to a game against the Bears and say, but against the Bears, he was really good. Well, that's great. When it mattered most, he completely folded. And look, are there other factors? Absolutely. But the reality is your quarterback needs to be able to lift you, and Sam could not. And so I think this is all a ploy to try to get the Vikings something, which, by the way, I would apply completely, and to get Sam as much as possible, which, by the way, would be awesome. He deserves it.
Yeah, he absolutely does. I'm not crapping on Sam Darnold at all. He deserves to be a starter somewhere next year, and hopefully he can, put together a nice little career for that, maybe 5 years or so for whatever team that is. And I think we'll all wish him well. It was a great story. I'm not anti-Sam at all, but I don't think, to your point, you can look at essentially what was 2 playoff games and then just all of a sudden wipe it under the rug because of what he did largely against teams that, when you go back and look at the Vikings schedule, didn't make the playoffs, or the ones that did. Are we going to throw him a parade for beating a depleted Packers team twice? I don't think we're going to do that.
And don't forget that Jacksonville debacle. The Jets game in London was bad. The Colts game was not great. So there's just, look, if it was fun, but I don't think there's any way. But Kevin O'Connell was not here to keep the likes of Sam Darnold as his quarterback.
No, and he's here to win a championship. And if you're going to go down with the ship, no Vikings pun intended, I think you actually, yes, he chose Sam Darnold, but that's not actually his guy. That was the best option he thought that was available to him. If you're going to end up, and he's not going to lose his job anytime soon, but if we're going to have some dismissal of Kevin O'Connell 2 or 3 years from now, even with his new deal, I think he would rather have that be because he went 5-12 with the guy that he helped choose, not because he hitched his wagon to Sam Darnold. Let's do this. Let's popcorn a few topics. Your Minnesota Wild continue to baffle me. I don't understand how their record is this good, but they're now going to be without Kaprizov for at least 4 weeks. It's probably closer to, I don't know, Judd, 6 weeks, 2 months. Can the Minnesota Wild continue to compete long-term without him? They already did it fairly well without him in one stint. So can they continue to compete without him? And try and explain to me why they're good, because I thought they'd be at best a wild card team, and they might be better than that.
They might be. They need to show more consistency. Now, they played the Toronto Maple Leafs in Toronto on Wednesday night and were absolutely fantastic. Partially, I think, because with Kaprizov off, they got challenged. Partially because, much like Finchie, Hines melted down on Saturday because they no-showed back-to-back home games against Utah last Thursday. They were awful. And then against Calgary on Saturday, they were putrid. Came back against the Blackhawks on the road. They've now won 19 road games. They're under 500 at home. They make no sense. That being said, if they decide to play hard, if they're not a like ultra talented team, but if they decide to play hard, if they get goaltending, they are a playoff team, which is more than I thought. At the end of the day, who knows? They might be a wild card team. And keep in mind, I think I looked this up. I think I'm right on this. Because of the Four Nations Face-Off tournament, they have 2 weeks off in February, which they're going to say is great for Kaprizov, and it does help a little bit. But if I'm not mistaken, they have 13 games in March, which is incredible amount of games. I think 11 are at home. So if they don't get themselves turned around at home, they could be in huge trouble. But I do think that I think they're a nice team. They're better than I thought. But when they try to play like they're talented, they ain't going to win.
Quick follow-up on Kaprizov. I guess I followed it, but I guess maybe I'm not as in tune as I thought I was or would hope to be. Is this surgery that he underwent, did they rush him back? I mean, I was at the Utah Hockey Club game, Judd, and you could tell he wasn't 100%. I mean, would they have been better served sitting him out longer, or was this going to happen anyways? I mean, I guess we'll never truly know, but I guess
12 games in about a month. So I think that this is just one where they hoped that rest would work. Now, if you read the quotes, it sounds like Kaprizov, as frustrated as he is, according to the quotes, is the one that decided to have the surgery, because Hines and Guerin both said he was playing at 60%. And as Hines told Kaprizov, you're better than most guys at 60% than a guy who's at full strength.
Yeah.
But it sounds like Kaprizov said, I want to have the surgery, which, by the way, I don't blame him. It's probably the smart move. But I don't know if there's fault here that the Wild, it feels like the Wild held him out as long as possible, brought him back. And to your point, and I was at the Utah game too, and I thought it might be rust, but he could not. He ordinarily plays such a tight game because he's an explosive skater.
Yeah, he was not explosive that night.
And he edges really, really tightly. He was doing that a little bit more by Sunday's game, but I think it was probably painful. So I don't know, because we don't even technically know what's wrong. We don't know when the surgery is. We don't know who the doctor is. Every other sport tells you they don't.
What do you mean? You can't glean from lower body injury what's wrong, Judd?
I mean, I think it's a groin or a hernia, because if it was a knee, his season is done. It's clearly not his feet. I think it's probably I'm going with groin or hernia, which would cause you problems in trying to edge and things like that. But anywho, I have no knowledge that the Wild brought him back too quickly. I think that they waited as long as possible. But I'm also, again, not buying he's back in 4 weeks. I am going to be surprised if he's back in the regular season. And by the way, if there's any setbacks, he ain't coming back, because what would the incentive on his part be? Because if you make this worse, it's going to be a longer recovery, and this already has become a long process.
And it could ultimately affect, if he comes back and has to sit out again or whatever that is, could ultimately maybe perhaps change the dollar amount he's going to end up getting in that next contract. Potpourri topic number 2. These next ones will be a lot quicker. Will the Minnesota Twins sign a player that I have heard of this offseason?
Sign one or trade for one?
I think they might trade for one.
Okay,
Will they
no.
sign one?
No.
I've heard of.
No.
Okay.
No, they won't.
Will they trade for one? I think yes on that.
That's a much better chance.
Okay.
But they're going to trade. But my guess is they'll trade Castro.
Yeah,
So,
I can see that.
They'll trade a player. They'll trade a major league player. But I think in spring training, the answer is yes. I think they're going to get a first baseman.
Is this maybe the time to trade Castro, though, anyways? I think we've talked about this. What are the chances he replicates last year?
Well, and Baldelli loves the versatility, but he is an eminently tradable player, and I believe he becomes a free agent after this season. So there is a compelling case to be made. And they do not have a first baseman right now. They don't have
a couple Gopher popcorn topics for you in closing.
Okay.
A popcorn topic number one, Ben Johnson. If you had to guess today, is Ben Johnson the coach of the Gopher basketball team next year?
Oh.
He might still get to 8 or 9 wins, but I would still argue I think it's time for a change.
Yeah, I'm trying to think though, because here's the thing: the program, they're not competitive when it comes to NIL.
Yeah, agreed.
There's so many,
and that's not his fault.
Well, yeah, and like if I'm a good coach, I don't think I want this job, but I'm going to say no, he's not.
Okay. Popcorn topic number 2. Will we see Bob and his boys in St. Louis in the Frozen Four this year?
If you don't, if you don't, something's gone wrong. Something's gone very wrong. You better see him there. Far too talented.
Michigan State's scary though, Judd. I've watched probably 6 of their games now this year, including 4 against the Gophers.
Yeah.
They look better than the Gophers. That doesn't mean if they meet in the tournament or even in the Big Ten tournament that they wouldn't beat them. Yeah. But man, they look scary good.
Oh yeah. Well, and the goaltender, Trey Augustine, who played for the U.S. team in the World Juniors, is fantastic. Charlie Strommel, the wild top pick here now, is playing well. All of that being said, this Gopher team, if you watch them, and I've been to about 4 games, there is far too much talent. If they do not get to St. Louis, something is like they will have underachieved. The expectation should be St. Louis.
Hockey's hockey and anything can happen, but if they give you a full 60 minutes, they should win almost every game that they play. I truly do believe that for everything that you said.
You're right. They're really good.
Not only though is Minnesota talented, Judd, they can be really fun displaying that talent when they're clicking and when they're turning it on.
Yep.
Okay, here's your final go for popcorn topic. Okay, I think here I guess in this case, I'll reference SKOR North here, since that is part of the job. This is separate from this pod. But I will say this. I think we all understand that the Vikings might not have a first-round draft pick. Time will tell on that. We'll see. But are you prepared this year, Judd, for this year's NFL draft to be all about the Minnesota Golden Gophers and the gaggle of players they're going to have drafted? Ursery's going to be drafted probably in the first round. The early returns on Max Brosmer at the Shrine Bowl are very good. He's going to be drafted. Lindenberg's going to be drafted. Wally's going to be drafted. Strigo might be drafted. Your Duke's Mayo Bowl champions are going to spend all weekend owning the NFL draft. Are you pumped?
Not really. Does Brosmer get a 7th round pick?
I don't know. There are some people that
him as a UDFA, but
there are some people that think he could be a day 3 pick. It sounds like he's performed very well at the Shrine Bowl. The actual game, which doesn't matter, is tonight, but it sounds like he's been really good this week down at the Shrine Bowl, which in the pantheon of all-star games is second. There's the Senior Bowl, which is 1, Shrine Bowl 2, and then the Hula Bowl, which does produce some kids who get drafted, but typically not your day 1 and day 2 kids, but we'll see. And I know I missed a few Gophers, but all that makes me think of Judd is you might have 6 guys drafted and you only won the Mayo Bowl.
Oh, but they underachieved. They really underachieved.
Yeah. Well, the Rutgers loss was a killer. You should never lose to Rutgers in anything. I firmly believe in that. Definitely should have beaten North Carolina. That doesn't hurt bowl placement, but it did hurt win totals. Yep. So I think that's all I got for you. Your Frost, by the way, number 2 in the PWHL.
Yep.
I got it. Have you've been to a couple games, right?
Been to 1 game.
I have not been there yet. I need to get there. They do pretty well in attendance.
Oh yeah.
They do pretty well in attendance.
It's a good product. It's a good. There are some really great players there.
That's all I got for you, Judd. I told you I would make this quick. It's like 72 degrees here in late January here in Minnesota, so I got to get out of this building and go for a walk.
Enjoy it.
Thank you, Judd. That's Judd Zulgad from SKOR North. He's got his Substack. You can find him on the X Machine. Appreciate the time, Judd. Thank you so much.
Talk to you later, Roscoe.
That is Mr. Judd Zulgad. Again, find him on the X Machine. He's got that Substack, all things SKOR North and Purple Daily. You can find me at the Ross Brendel on the X Machine. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, like, comment, help share this podcast no matter how you're listening, whether that be Apple, Spotify. I don't care. Just tell your friends and family all about Minnesota Sports Chat. If you are on one of those podcast machines, please rate and review kindly. Please tell all your family and friends. And don't forget to support Beans Coffee Company, coffeebybeans.com. I promise you, the coffee is fantastic. Promo code SportsChat will save you some cash at checkout. I'm Ross Brendel at the Ross Brendel on the X Machine, back here in this feed real soon.